It's December 29th, 1993, about 6.8 ANL off the coast of Western Australia.
Right.
And there's this specialized offshore supply vessel. It's just doing a routine cargo drop near a massive gas platform. The sea is rough, but, it's not extreme for this part of the world.
Pretty standard conditions, really.
Yeah, exactly. Yet in literally a matter of seconds, this completely mundane task becomes a fatal tragedy. And we're bringing you into this specific moment today for our deep dive because it's one of those rare incidents that permanently rewrites the laws of the ocean.
It really is. The stack of forensic investigations and the legislative history we're looking at today, it reveals a pretty terrifying reality about maritime logistics.
I mean, it's intense.
Yeah, because this wasn't the story of some freak, unpredictable rogue wave, right? We are looking at an absolute masterclass in latent hazard.
Like the hidden dangers that just sort of quietly accumulate over time.
Exactly. You have a highly specific vessel design, a compromised crew roster, and this subtle oversight with a piece of cargo. And they all aligned perfectly to cost a seafarer his life.
Yeah.
And by dissecting this, we can see exactly how the shockwaves from this one wet deck overhauled occupational health and safety laws across an entire industry.
So to really understand how this happened, I think we first have to look at the stage where it occurred.
Right.
The vessel itself, the shelf supporter.
Yeah, let's start there.
Because from what I gather in the sources, this wasn't it wasn't a standard cargo boat just ferrying boxes back and forth.
Oh, far from it.
No.
The shelf supporter was built in 1985 specifically for the Northwest Shelf expansion.
Okay.
And it was tailored for subsea diving and deploying remotely operated vehicles, ROVs.
Right, those underwater drones.
Right. So a standard supply ship usually has these heavy towing winches or high steel bulwarks at the back. Basically, physical walls that define the stern and protect the deck from the sea.
Like a barrier.
Exactly. But the shelf supporter needed to easily slide massive, delicate subsea equipment directly into the water.
Oh, I see. So the walls would be in the way.
Yeah, they'd be completely in the way. So the engineers designed it with a 68-meter, completely unobstructed open stern.
Wow.
Instead of a protective wall, it just had this low stern roller.
I mean, I guess that makes getting equipment into the water incredibly easy, but it also means the back of the ship is just totally open to the ocean.
Yeah, it's entirely exposed.
And I was reading about the environmental setup that morning, and the forensic report specifically notes the vessel's trim, like the angle it sits in the water.
Yes, the trim is a huge factor here.
How steep of an angle are we actually talking about?
Well, they had it trimmed 0.4 meters down by the stern.
Okay.
So the back end was intentionally sitting about 1.5 feet lower than the rest of the ship.
Okay, so think about the physics of that for a second. It's like if you take a shallow baking tray,
Right.
and you tip the back edge downward, and then you push it toward a running faucet.
That's a great way to put it.
You're essentially turning the ship into a giant scoop for the ocean.
That paints the perfect picture, yeah. And the weather that morning featured 20-knot winds coming from the southwest.
Which is rough, but not crazy.
Right. In the offshore industry of 1993, 20 knots wasn't considered extreme enough to halt operations.
Makes sense.
But when you combine a rolling sea, an open stern, and that downward tilt you just mentioned, the vessel was actively catching breaking seas. The ocean was just routinely washing right up onto the working deck.
Man. And right in the middle of this wet, moving environment, we have the human element.
It's always the human element.
Yeah. And reading through this, it feels less like a random accident and more like a combination lock clicking into place, just one dial at a time.
Absolutely.
The first dial is the roster, because it's the Christmas break,
Right.
and the ship's regular cook had previously injured himself.
Yeah, he had to be taken off the vessel entirely.
So they're already down a guy.
Right. And to solve that immediate logistical problem, an able seaman, an experienced deckhand, he stepped inside to act as the temporary cook.
Which seems like a practical fix on paper.
On paper, sure, but pulling that man off the deck had a massive cumulative effect on safety.
Because it shrinks the team outside.
Exactly. The deck watch was suddenly stripped down to just 2 men trying to handle a massive cluttered cargo load in a rolling sea.
Just 2 guys.
Yeah, 1 remaining able seaman and a greaser.
Wait, I gotta stop you there. What
Yeah.
exactly is a greaser in this context?
Oh, right. So traditionally, a greaser is an engine room rating.
Okay.
Their job usually involves maintaining and lubricating the ship's mechanical systems below deck.
So they're not usually out wrangling cargo.
Not typically, no, but in this reduced crew scenario, he was drafted up top to work the cargo deck alongside the able seamen.
Wow. Okay, so you have a smaller team,
Yeah.
and they're under intense pressure to prepare this deck.
Right.
And it's completely cluttered with heavy cargo for the platform crane.
Right. Which brings us to the cargo itself.
Yeah, let's talk about the cargo, because the crew had used these things called tugger wires.
Yes.
And for anyone listening, if you picture a thick, horizontal belt of steel wire pulled tight by a motorized winch, you get the idea.
That's pretty accurate.
So they use this wire to tightly hug a massive block of cargo against the ship's safety rails so it wouldn't slide around.
Right. To keep it all secure.
But the specific arrangement of this cargo is just chilling when you look at the deck plans.
It really is. The crew had loaded a 5-ton cargo skip, which is basically a large, heavy-duty steel dumpster for transporting gear.
Okay, a big metal box.
Yeah, but instead of stowing it lengthwise, they placed it athwartships, which is a maritime term meaning sideways across the deck.
Okay. Sideways.
And by positioning it that way, they inadvertently left a gap of exactly 1 meter between this sideways skip and a fixed, permanent domestic waste bin that was bolted to the deck.
A 1-meter gap between two massive walls of steel.
Exactly.
So the combination lock is almost completely set now. We have the open stern acting as a scoop, the downward trim, the reduced crew, and this 1-meter gap.
All lining up.
It's ERA 600 hours, and the operation begins. But right away, someone actually realizes there's a problem.
Yeah, the greaser steps out onto the deck to start the shift.
And what does he see?
Well, he immediately sees rough water swirling around his legs, sometimes reaching mid-thigh.
That is terrifying.
Right. He recognizes the danger immediately. He actually leaves the deck, climbs up to the bridge, and tries to warn the master of the vessel that the deck is unsafe.
But the operation doesn't stop. I mean, why does the master ignore a direct warning from his own crew member?
It really comes down to a severe failure in bridge resource management, and it was heavily influenced by the technology of the time.
How so?
Well, the master was actively operating the dynamic positioning system.
Oh, DP. So for anyone unfamiliar, dynamic positioning means the ship isn't anchored, right?
Correct. No anchors.
It's using computers and thrusters to constantly fight the wind and current to, hover in one exact spot on the ocean.
Exactly. And it requires immense concentration. The master is manipulating a joystick to hold the ship steady right beneath the gas platform's massive crane.
It sounds incredibly stressful.
It is. Plus, he's simultaneously coordinating with the platform manager over the VHF radio.
Right.
So he was experiencing severe cognitive overload. He literally did not process the greaser's presence or the warning.
He just tuned it out. Tunnel vision.
Completely. The prevailing culture at the time prioritized operational continuity above all else. As long as the DP system was holding the ship in place, the operation just moved forward.
So the greaser goes back down to the wet deck.
Yeah.
And here's where the forensic report throws a massive curveball.
The paperwork.
Yes. The sideways skip we mentioned, the one positioned near that gap, it was officially listed on the ship's cargo manifest as empty.
Right. Empty.
I read that and couldn't make sense of it. Because even on a slippery deck, an empty steel box weighing maybe a single ton, it shouldn't turn into a lethal weapon just from a passing wave.
You wouldn't think so.
Was the paperwork just completely wrong?
Well, here's the thing. The paperwork was technically accurate when the skip was originally loaded.
Oh, I see.
But it ignored the reality of the environment. And this is the insidious nature of latent mass.
Okay, break that down.
So forensic investigators discovered that during the transit from the port at King Bay, this open-top skip had accumulated 30 centimeters of seawater, just from the ocean spray and the rain.
That's what, just a foot of water?
Just a foot.
Wow.
But water is incredibly dense. That 30 centimeters added 1.5 tons of unexpected invisible mass to the inside of the skip.
That is insane. 1.5 tons from a foot of water.
Yes, so the quote-unquote empty 1-ton box was now a 2.5-ton block of steel and sloshing water.
Oh.
And because it was stowed sideways, its broad, flat side was facing the open stern. It was basically acting like a giant sail perfectly designed to catch incoming water.
And the fatal moment unfolds horrifyingly fast after this. The platform crane lowers its heavy hook toward the deck.
Right, to pick up the cargo.
And the able seaman and the greaser they need to release one of those tugger wires to respool it,
Just for a moment.
just to get it out of the way of the crane hook.
Yeah.
But the second they release the tension on that wire, the entire block of cargo is unsecured.
Totally loose on a wet deck.
And the able seaman happens to be standing right in that 1 meter gap.
Yes. And up on the bridge, the master is looking out the aft window, and he suddenly spots a massive wave surging over the stern roller.
And he tries to warn them, right?
He does. He grabs the fixed loud hailer system and shouts a warning to the men below.
But I assume the math tells us that a shouted warning just wouldn't make a difference here.
It was physically impossible to react in time. Once the wave broke over the stern, the investigators calculated the water was traveling down that steel deck at 10.45 meters per second.
10.45 meters per second. That's like Olympic sprinter speed.
Exactly.
That's over 23 miles an hour, carrying the weight of the ocean.
And the cargo was located about 20 meters from the stern. So at that speed, the able seaman had less than 2 seconds between the wave breaching the back of the ship and the wall of water hitting him.
Less than 2 seconds.
Yeah. Human reaction times, especially on a cluttered, slippery deck while wearing heavy work boots, it simply does not allow you to clear that space in under 2 seconds.
So the 2.5-ton wet skip catches the massive hydrodynamic force of the waves on its broadside.
Right.
And it is violently shoved across the deck, just sliding on the water. It closes that 1 meter gap instantly, pinning the able seaman against the fixed waist bin.
It's a devastating impact. It causes catastrophic, crushing trauma to his chest and spine.
And the immediate aftermath is just this desperate, heartbreaking rescue attempt.
It is. The greaser, along with the cook, who actually sprints out from the galley, they grab a solid iron crowbar,
Right.
and they try to lever this 2.5-ton skip off their crewmate.
And the report mentions they actually bend the solid iron crowbar trying to move it. They physically bent solid iron.
Yeah, the weight of the steel, combined with the momentum of that sloshing seawater trapped inside it, it was just too immense.
I can't even imagine.
They eventually managed to pry it back just enough to free him. But despite paramedics being lowered in a basket from the platform and, 30 minutes of resuscitation efforts, the injuries were completely incompatible with life.
It's just awful. But a tragedy of this magnitude, it forces an entire industry to look in the mirror. Because this wasn't just a sad accident, it was an exposure of a totally broken system.
Without a doubt.
And we have to transition from the wet deck of the shelf supporter to the bureaucratic halls of Australian maritime legislation to see how this actually forced a change.
Yeah, the legal landscape in 1993 was really ripe for a reckoning.
How bad was it?
Well, at the time, maritime safety in Australia was still largely governed by the Navigation Act 1912.
Right, 1912. That is literally the year the Titanic sank.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it was written with a very Titanic-era mindset.
Meaning what?
Meaning it was a purely prescriptive checkbox piece of legislation. It cared deeply about whether a ship was technically seaworthy, like did it have the right number of life rafts? Was the hull structurally sound?
Okay, so the hardware of the ship.
Right. If you ticked those boxes, the ship was legally, quote-unquote, safe. It had almost nothing to say about whether an individual worker could be crushed during a routine cargo operation.
So under the old checkbox system, the shelf supporter was perfectly legal, even though it was a floating hazard. But the sources show there was already pressure building to change this. The Australian Institute of Marine and Power Engineers, the AMPE, they had been fiercely lobbying the government for years to implement modern health and safety standards.
Yes, they were pushing hard.
And they weren't just fighting for guys getting crushed on deck, they were fighting silent killers, too.
Yeah, the AMPE's involvement is a really crucial piece of the context here, because they represented the marine engineers working down in the bowels of these ships.
Down in the engine rooms.
Right. And for decades, those workers had been exposed to asbestos lagging in the engine rooms. They were dying of mesothelioma 20 or 30 years after their service. So the union was trying to force the government to recognize that seafarers weren't just disposable components of the ship. They were human beings who deserved a baseline duty of care.
And the shelf supporter tragedy really became the awful catalyst that finally pushed the new paradigm over the line.
It did.
Because the government had just enacted the Occupational Health and Safety Maritime Industry Act, 1993.
Right, the OHS-MI Act.
And this introduced that exact duty of care concept into maritime law. Employers were suddenly legally mandated to provide a safe working environment and critically safe systems of work.
Yes, and it also mandated strict, independent incident reporting. Which is, frankly, the only reason we have such a granular forensic breakdown of the 30 centimeters of water inside that skip.
We wouldn't even know about it otherwise.
Exactly. But the shelf supporter wasn't an isolated wake-up call.
Right. The sources mentioned a few others.
Yeah, between 1993 and 1994, the industry suffered a whole cluster of offshore vessel fatalities. Ships operating at the absolute limits of their design envelopes in harsh environments were getting people killed.
And this concentration of deaths accelerated the shift away from the 1912 checkbox mentality and into something called the safety case regime.
Right. The safety case regime fundamentally flipped the burden of proof.
Okay, how does that work?
Well, under the old rules, safety was the regulator's problem. If a sailor died, the regulator asked, did we write the right rule? But under the safety case regime, safety becomes the operator's problem. A shipping company couldn't just point to a list of life jackets anymore. They had to submit a comprehensive document, a safety case, proactively proving to the government that they had identified every possible way a worker could be harmed on their specific ship doing their specific job.
Okay, so to put this in everyday terms, it's like the difference between your car passing a basic annual smog check, which is a prescriptive rule, right?
Sure.
Versus the government forcing you to actively prove that your specific, unique route to work every single morning is safe, accounting for the weather, the traffic, and your own driving habits.
That's a really great way to conceptualize it. The operators had to prove they had reduced all risks to a level that is as low as reasonably practicable.
LR.
Yes, a concept known industry-wide as LR. You have to anticipate human error. You have to anticipate unique weather. If a risk can be lowered further without bankrupting the operation, you are legally required to do it. And this philosophy laid the groundwork for modern unified regulators like NOPSEMA, which oversees Australian offshore safety today.
Okay, so the laws changed. The paperwork became rigorous. Executives couldn't hide behind a checklist anymore. They had to actually anticipate the human element.
Yep.
But did any of this bureaucracy actually change the physics of the ocean? Because we leap forward in our sources 22 years later into the modern era of safety culture to see if the lessons truly stuck.
And honestly, this part of the deep dive is where the story gets really chilling.
You're referring to the fatal incident aboard the Scandi Pacific in 2015.
I am.
Because history rhymes here in the worst possible way. It is 2015. We have another open-stern offshore vessel.
Right.
Another dynamic positioning operation, this time off the Pilbara coast. And once again, we have a reduced crew out on a low deck trying to secure heavy cargo while unpredictable waves wash over the open stern.
The parallels are just haunting. Just like the shelf supporter crew momentarily releasing the tugger wire to reposition it, the crew on the Scandi Pacific released a primary lashing chain because they wanted to secure the cargo better.
So their intention was actually safety.
Exactly. But that brief action left a massive block of cargo unsecured for just a few moments.
Then what happens? Two large waves surge over the open stern in quick succession. The water slams into the unsecured containers, shifts them violently forward, and traps an integrated rating.
And for clarity, an integrated rating is a modern classification for a seafarer who is cross-trained in both deck and engine room duties.
Right, so a highly trained modern professional, and he is crushed fatally against a skip in almost the exact same mechanical sequence as 1993.
It's awful, and the Scandi Pacific investigation called out the exact same systemic failures. Despite 20 years of the safety case regime, the risks of securing cargo in prevailing weather hadn't been adequately assessed for that specific operation.
They missed it.
Yeah. The safety management system relied on the subjective judgment of the crew on the spot rather than having hard, defined weather limits for excessive water on deck.
And this highlights the ultimate tension in the industry, right? Bureaucracy versus physics.
Right.
Because despite all the LRP risk assessments, despite the daily toolbox talks and the sophisticated safety culture of 2015, the fundamental hazard remained identical. You are putting soft human beings on a low, wet deck, surrounded by unsecured heavy steel, facing a turbulent sea with absolutely no physical wall to protect them.
And the investigators recognized that exact limitation. The Scandi Pacific report explicitly called out the ongoing failure to engineer actual physical solutions for open stern vessels.
Right, actual barriers.
Yes. They noted that operators were relying entirely on administrative controls, paperwork, procedures, human vigilance. They hadn't considered engineering controls, like designing retractable barriers or raising the height of the stern roller to physically stop the water from rushing up the deck. We evolved the paperwork, but we completely failed to engineer a barrier against the physics.
You just can't paperwork away a 10-meter-per-second wave.
You really can't.
We've journeyed a long way today. We started with the quiet alignment of latent hazards on the deck of the shelf supporter in 1993. We explored how 30 centimeters of rainwater can turn an empty steel box into a literal battering ram.
Yeah.
We saw how the loss of an able seaman broke the back of the archaic 1912 Navigation Act, birthing the modern safety case regime and the concept of duty of care.
A massive shift.
And finally, we faced the uncomfortable reality that even the best safety culture struggles to overcome a fundamental physical design flaw, as we saw with the Scandi Pacific decades later.
It is a profound evolution, but definitely an incomplete one. And there is a final lingering reality I want you to mull over today. The physical vessel at the center of our deep dive, the shelf supporter, it didn't retire after 1993.
Really?
No, it survived the 1980s offshore boom. And over the decades, it was sold, refitted, and renamed multiple times. It was the Lady Christine, the GeoAsia, the GeoAltis.
Wow.
And today, that exact same physical hull still operates on the oceans as a vessel called the Ocean Vantage.
The exact same steel, still out there working today.
Still working, but it currently operates under the flag of Panama.
A flag of convenience.
Right. The global maritime industry allows a vessel to seamlessly transition into a totally different regulatory jurisdiction just by hoisting a different country's flag on its mast.
Right.
So the question is, are the hard-won safety lessons written in the blood of seafarers truly global? Does a culture of safety stay baked into the steel of the ship? Or are the protections for the workers standing on that wet deck only as strong as the specific country the ship happens to be registered to on paper today?
Wow, that is definitely something for you to consider the next time you think about the massive invisible logistics network keeping our modern world running. We love the comfort of engineered precision. We love the idea that a safety checklist guarantees a safe outcome. But out in the open ocean, the variables are always shifting, and the muddy waters are always waiting to wash over the deck. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.